Morning all, I'd like to show you an absolutely classic encounter when Fischer was just 16 in the Bled Zagreb Belgrade Candidates Tournament of 1959. He was playing against Tigran Petrosian. Tigran Petrosian was a Soviet Armenian Grandmaster, world champion between 1963 and 69. He was nicknamed Iron Tigran, due to his almost impenetrable playing style, which emphasised safety above all else. He was a candidate for the World Chess Championship on 8 occasions: 1953, 56, 59, 62, 71, 74, 77 and 1980. He won the World Championship in 1963 against Mikhail Botvinnik, and successfully defended it in 1966 against Boris Spassky, and lost it in 1969 to Spassky. Thus he was the defending world champion, or a world championship candidate, in 10 consecutive 3-year cycles. He won the Soviet championship 4 times, 1959, 61, 69 and 75, and is recognised as the hardest player to beat in the history of chess. I would like to add, on this channel there was a set of videos, Kasparov against Petrosian, which I called Conquering a Style, but it should be noted that in the latter 2 encounters Petrosian's health was suffering, which may have had a big impact on those games. In the early encounters against Kasparov, it was shown that Petrosian was a great wriggler, especially with his king, being able to wriggle his king into safety. Let's look at this game then. So Fischer, playing white, kicked off with e4, and Petrosian played the Kara Khan. A very solid opening, but maybe a bit of a surprise. Perhaps Sicilian was expected. We see knight c3, and Petrosian played d5, and now this variation, knight f3. Okay, so this is the 2 knights variation, not very originally named, both knights coming out, called the 2 knights variation. Bishop g4, pinning a knight, and black is emphasising a dark square strategy. Actually, this signifies to undermine white on the dark squares by taking on f3 at some point potentially, and we'll see this. White encourages black to do that exchange, getting the light square bishop. Now knight f6, d3, e6, and this bishop, it could go to e2, but actually g3 is favoured, and this move is very popular, bishop b4, which aims to actually exchange off the dark square bishops and leave white even more vulnerable potentially on future dark squares. And you'll note in particular c3, keep a note in particular of the c3 square, so a strategic bishop exchange here. Black is now threatening d4, so not giving white time to play bishop g2 either. That would be pretty bad. Bishop g2 here, d4, even though a3. Black has queen a5 here, and it's unclear to lose the exchange like this. So, okay, so this is very theoretical. Bishop b4, even today, this is the most popular move. And bishop d2 now is played, and black does go in for the bishop exchange with d4, driving the knight back to b1, but it can come back out potentially to use the c4 square on this exchange. And Petrosian did actually take immediately on d2. I think nowadays this is quite a rare idea to take immediately on d2, because it seems to be helping white get the knight to c4. Queen b6 has been played at least 8 times according to my live book. Bishop takes d2, much rarer. Petrosian played it anyway, accelerating this knight coming back to c4, which seems a very comfortable idea. And in fact, it seems strange maybe that Petrosian not only encourages this knight to come to c4, he's also saying to white, you know, do it to attack e5, giving e5 a target. But the point of e5 is to lock in this bishop, this fianchetto bishop. So, okay, bishop g2, no rush to play knight c4. c5, giving black the c6 square potentially for the knight. Castles, now knight c6. queen e2, getting out of the way of the f pawn. So this is a typical king's engine in reverse, kind of king's engine attack formation, where f4 now, and you might think the pressure on e5 might be good in conjunction with knight c4 later. Trojan plays queen e7, and we do see this kind of king's engine attack formation. And black now castles queenside. I think castling kingside looks a little bit riskier. Perhaps white can just play f5 potentially, unless it's really weakening the dark squares considerably. But it looks like a standard thing you do in the king's engine defense to roll these pawns up. So castling queenside maybe seems a bit safer in some respects. And Fischer gets to work now on the queen side. But it's not just about the king, this next move, which he plays a3. It's about potentially undermining with e5, the e5. If knight c4 is happening, then b5 would also be a very useful threat to undermine this e5 pawn and break black's structure. In fact, also b takes c to try and undermine black's pawn structure here. We see now knight e8, which does mean black is possibly playing f6 soon to maintain that pawn chain, which is like a lock and key against this bishop. And possibly in this position you might consider f takes e5, but it's not that effectual in this position. F takes e5, knight takes e5, say b4. Black has a very impressive knight on e5 here, and this attack really needs this bishop, but it's completely blockaded. So this might not be ideal in this position to play f takes e5. Not only that, for example, let's take this a bit further. Black might even be able to play h5 to try and weaken white further on the dark squares. So this kind of position doesn't seem too bad for black, but it's a possibility that needs to be factored in to play f takes e5. Fischer actually played b4, and now here again, what happens if f6? Well, maybe b5. This might be okay for white to use this kind of plan, and the bishop might not be too terrible with h4 and bishop h3 later. So this might not be that bad. It's a bit blocked in. But in the game, Tigran undermined his own structure here in the centre with the move c takes b4. A bit provocative in some respects. And here now f takes e5 is under slightly better circumstances than earlier, much earlier, because the knight and queen are now ready for b4 here, and also the knight's kind of protecting a7. So this is a very different position here, much more effective in fact it seems for f takes e5 to be reconsidered, whilst before positioning it could have been ruled out. Here this looks like it's quite attractive. If knight takes e5, that's particularly bad. A takes, and we're on a7. So slight nuances. That means f takes e5 is more effective here, and this pawn chain being undermined with no c5 pawn makes queen f2 more effective, and all of a sudden we've got resources like c3 targeting a7. So in this position, after c takes b4, it does seem that f takes e5 is a viable idea here. If black takes the queen, maybe check, and rook takes f7. This is nice for white. So okay, but Fischer in the game played knight c4, and this gives Tigran a chance to maintain his pawn chain with f6, and in some way really justifying black's c takes b4 actually, because now the pawn chain has been maintained. Black has actually weakened this c3 square with the earlier strategic exchange of dark square bishops. The c3 square is a great target for a positional maneuver like this. And also black has the potential here to create an outside passed pawn already. There were the seeds of an outside passed pawn in this position to be borne in mind. This bishop is still locked in, and this pawn chain, okay, against the knight c4, seems solid enough now. White plays f takes, black takes with f pawn, a takes, and now b5 is a serious threat in this position, very, very serious threat. But knight c7 is dual purpose, not just against b5, but the knight can consider coming in later to c3, which has been weakened. White is weak on the dark squares here. Knight a5, and now Tigran does a very, very good move. Potentially white is threatening knight takes and rook takes a7. Does he use his king? If he uses his king to protect b8, this might be playable. Takes, because how does white actually gain more pressure here? Let's give an example. Knight b5 is pretty solid, supporting a7. It looks as though black shouldn't have too much of a problem here. White's playing without this bishop in this position. This diagonal is not really something to be scared about. So this is not too great for white, this kind of position. So king b8 does seem playable, but Tigran played actually knight b5, which is also playable, immediately setting sights on c3. White plays knight takes c6, b takes c6, which can protect that pawn doubly now with knight and the queen. So what can white do? He's with this kind of dead bishop. Has he got that much play against black? His next move, rook f2, as though he's interested in doubling on the f file. We see g6, potentially getting out of the way if there's a doubling on the f file. g6, and now we see h4, king b7, and now Fischer plays h5. So he's trying to get something going on the king side here. He's got that f file kind of gazing down the f file. Now, immediate knight c3. This pawn has also been on here. In principle, it seems a bit dangerous to leave f7. Queen takes b4 is actually played. Check. King b6. It looks strange for the king to be on b6 as well, but if the king did step back, then I think that might be much more dangerous. Queen f2, and we've got resources like c4, in fact, because of this. This is an important idea in this position. If black takes it, a7 is going to be under fire. So, okay. And now we see queen f2, and it looks as though c4 now is possible, using that pin on the d4 pawn. That's the principal kind of threat. And Tigran could have tried to dampen that down by playing queen b2 here. Okay, the white's rook moves, and now a5, and now c4 we can just take on f2 and then play knight c3. But he didn't nail down c4 here. In fact, after queen f2, Tigran played a5, allowing c4, which sorts out one connectivity issue that now white's pieces can swing to the queen side potentially. But this is a very strong knight now on c3, protecting key squares. The king, it looks as though the king's strange on b6, but this is Tigran Petrosian. He's very good with king safety. He's one of the most difficult players to beat ever in the history of the game, and he knows how to put his king into great safety. So it seems paradoxical to walk it up the board, but in this situation, now he's got this very nicely entrenched knight, he's got this running past outside pawn, and he's controlling key squares well enough for king safety not to be such a major issue. Rook f1, which might be a slight mistake. Perhaps queen f6 it's pointed out by my analytical assistant here, with queen g7 potentially as a threat, queen e5. What would black do? Maybe rook df8, and we can have hairy continuations like this, but white should be okay. But in the game we see this move rook f1, and now black can really emphasize that passed pawn. a4 is played. Fischer plays queen f6, trying to counter-attack on this side of the board, and probing, touching both rooks with this move means that now rook takes h7 to deflect one rook away from protecting the other is on the cards. That's kind of ignored now. Perhaps best for black would have been queen d6. After queen d6, it seems it's a difficult position for white here, it seems. For example, queen g7, it doesn't matter about such checks here, because the king remarkably can use the c5 square here, and white's attack is running out of steam. And again, we're faced with this menacing passed a pawn in this position. So, okay, so Petrosian played actually queen c5, which I think is a little bit less accurate than queen d6. And now it allows Fischer's next move, rook takes h7, getting a pawn. Okay. But now rook df8, queen takes, rook takes h7. Does Petrosian want to exchange off rooks? Well, in principle, yes, he's got this outside dangerous passed pawn, but white has also got now this dangerous h pawn to counterbalance this a pawn. So yes, Petrosian takes on f1 though, and pushes his a pawn, and the white queen is a bit helpless against this pawn queening. All white can do now is try and queen himself. How can he get back in time? There's no way. So we're in a strange situation here, where the earlier dark square strategy led to white being weak on the dark squares, and this wonderfully entrenched knight on c3 maintained king safety for kings on opposite sides of the board, which has now culminated in two passed pawns on opposite sides of the board. So white plays now h6 and black plays a2, and they're both going to queen quite ruthlessly. Queen g8, setting the queening square. a1 queening, h7, and black, believe it or not, hasn't got really time to exploit white's king safety here. Although it seems the shot knight e2 check might be promising. What would go on here? Say king g2, there is a shot here, knight takes g3, so that if king takes, this is crushing, queen takes f1. That is a big problem here. Imagine this scenario, queen takes d3, this is not very nice for white at all. Black's got the checks in first here, and is left with material advantage. But knight takes g3, you might think, well, queen takes. Again, there's queen f8, so this is an important tactic to consider, because it's putting a dampener on things, it seems. But in this position, white can actually force a perpetual check. With check, 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 and there's no escaping it, because if this loses the a7 square, because here if we try and win this queen, there's queen a7, and this is just perpetual check again. So the king cannot escape the perpetual checks here. So perpetual checking saves the day in this position. But it was an important tactic to bear in mind, this knight e2 check for knight takes g3. Petrosian actually played queen d6, and now we have the 4 queens on the board, which makes the game very unique to have 4 queens. It's very rare this happens in very high level games. So I think the preconditions for it to happen, well, both sides are castled opposite to each other. Black had that the signs of an outside passed pawn earlier on, and white was working on the king side to generate a dangerous passed pawn himself. And we have this remarkable scenario now. So what is white actually threatening if he had another move? Well, he'd start the checks maybe, which would be pretty dangerous. Maybe he wouldn't mind exchanging off a queen to try and pick up e5 and then use his g-pawn later. Well, Petrosian guards against queen b8. Fischer in this position plays the move g4, which is actually apparently one of the best moves to play from an engine perspective in this very, very complicated position. If he tries queen e8, this seems to be a viable alternative to just target the e5 pawn. Black might be able to respond queen a to e7. It's strange to have to qualify queens, but it's a wonderful aspect of this 4 queen scenario. Let's say queen a8. Very complicated position indeed, really, this kind of scenario. Very unusual. Queen d c7 as an example. White's always got the option as well to try and trade off one pair of queens. This looks good for white, from at least from an engine point of view, this position. So queen e8 looks like an alternative to g4, which is what Fischer played. Rather optimistic, I guess, to try and think of that pawn as now queening in this new scenario. Petrosian does something very interesting. He continues his king walk with the move king c5 now. Okay. And now we see white playing queen f8. Exchanging off one of the queens, potentially. Queen a to e7. But now, avoiding the queen exchange, I don't think this is good for white here. Taking queen h6. This might not be that hot for white here, because black has these invasion points in this position, like f3 in particular. So what Fischer did here is actually queen a8. He's bearing in mind the check possibilities. And Petrosian does the only move, I think. Queen a3 looks like a very, very serious threat, especially with c5 coming up potentially as a resource. So he plays actually king b4. The king helps himself to defending here the a3 square. And we see now queen h2, as though there's an interesting queen b2. And remarkably again, and this is why I think Petrosian is an amazing king wriggler, and with this king wriggling he even had later success against the likes of Kasparov in some games. The king helps himself to defence with king b3, remarkably. But it does also mean now that queen a3 is possible with this battery of queens as well. So we see queen a1, and the knight's covering key squares here, b1 and d1. Black now plays queen a3, and if white refuses an exchange of queens now, let's say white plays queen e1, then queen g5, it looks very difficult indeed to see what white's actually doing here. So Fischer simplifies now the position. So alas, that's the end of the 4 queens now after queen takes a3. King takes a3. Queen h6. And then we see queen f7, interested in that f3 square, and the king defends f3 with king g2. And now we see the move king b3. Where is this king heading? Well, it seems that potentially there's knight d1 to e3 on the cards. So the king is stepping out of potential checks, like on d6 perhaps. Was this really a threat for white? Or queen c1 check in particular is more relevant. So the king is stepping out of checks here. Fischer goes back with his queen, and we see now queen h7, which looks a little bit odd. What is the queen actually doing there? It's standing by this pawn. It doesn't look as though it's got major prospects. And now a bit of a howler from Fischer. He plays king g3, which allows a nice tactic. I wonder if you can spot it if I give you 10 seconds starting from Now, okay, queen takes e4. There's a nice fork here. If takes, knight takes e4 check, and black is winning here in this position. So Fischer plays the much better queen f2, which keeps his chances alive. And after queen h1, Fischer offered a draw, which thankfully for him was accepted. He was a bit nervous about it not being accepted. Black is slightly better. Black has got prospects of e4 here, but Petrosian, I guess, was extremely tired after this game with the complexity of the 4 queens earlier. Decided to, well, a draw was accepted. So let's see, in this final position, if queen g2, queen h6, black's better, but it's not so clear about e4. As long as e4 is stopped, black has some work to do. But okay, it's still very, very complicated. The win is going to be a protracted struggle from this position. So fair enough. After queen h1, a draw was agreed. So an intensely exciting game with 4 queens on the board. An extremely memorable game indeed. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.